Welcome back to Telltale. I'm Emily,
I'm Greg.
and today we are going to be talking about the pros and cons of rereading books.
hmm
So, are you much of a rereader?
That's about all I do.
Really?
Well, I mean, Samantha gets me to read new books,
Mm-hmm.
but otherwise, I'm mostly rereading
I'm
old
trying to
stuff.
get you to read some too, but
Yeah,
yeah.
most of what I read is because so much of my favorite stuff I read 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I am going back and rereading, trying to reread all of it because I loved it, but I've forgotten a lot of it, and I
Yeah.
want to reread it and refresh my memory
Mm-hmm.
before I die.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's a good per.
so yeah, I'm doing both, and and then I am trying new stuff. There's a lot of new stuff I want to try. There's stuff I get dragged into, like Throne of
Mm-hmm.
Glass.
Yeah. I think because of starting Telltale, I have reread a lot more than I ever have in my life. I was always like the kid who's like, this was great, move on to the next thing. I maybe had a couple things that I reread as a kid, like Sabriel or Sabriel, however you say it, from by Garth Nix, is a book I will come back to every few years. Um, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, books I come back to every few years. Um, but I really don't have a ton of works that I've reread until we started going to Telltale, and I did need to refresh my memory because I read it in high
hmm
school or college. I read a lot of things in college, some of it relevant to school, some of it not.
Yeah.
And even in middle school, I've always been an avid reader, so the stories didn't always stay or they got jumbled up in my head. And sometimes, like, I start rereading it, I'm like, oh, I remember this now. And the
Yeah.
whole story comes back to me. And sometimes I have to reread it, and I'm like, I don't remember that at all. And sometimes I think I read a thing and I never did. I just know so much about it because of discussion or how popular it was. Like Little Women.
hmm
I can't recall if I actually read Little Women.
Right.
Have I seen just all the different movie variations that existed or miniseries? Has it just been so discussed in literature so much and on so many of like the podcasts and videos and stuff that I've watched that I feel like I've read it? I don't remember.
hmm
So that's another reason why I reread things.
Well, and for me
Right.
at my age, um, most of my favorite stuff I read when I was a teenager, 12 to 18 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and after that I started getting busy with school and work and stuff, and had less time for reading. And by the 1990s, I wasn't really reading anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so now getting back into reading, rereading the stuff that I loved as a kid, I'm finding stuff in it that I didn't see when I was a dumb kid.
Mm-hmm.
I have so much more life experience, and I'm picking up on things that I didn't pick up on when I was young.
Yeah.
And I'm finding them better now than they were when I
Mm-hmm.
was a teenager.
Yeah. And in my case, I'm finding two things that were different in relevance. It's not even better. It's just now that I'm at this stage of life, something in the book makes sense. At one
hmm
point, maybe I was more on par with Laura Ingalls Wilder, whereas now I'm a little closer to mom and pa's mentalities about things, and you understand better what adulthood means, even
Yeah.
though it's a different time,
hmm
because I'm closer in age to them than I am to Laura.
hmm
Little House on the Prairie feels different.
Right.
It's different to read it that way, which is, can also be a con sometimes,
hmm
because then you
But
start.
but you also just see things in
Mhm.
stories. Like I've read Rescue Party by Arthur C. Clarke probably 5 times over the years.
Mhm.
But it's been a long time since the last time I read it, and I recently reread it, and I saw something about it that I never saw before.
Mhm.
And I went, wow, this story is really amazing. I in the past, I always thought it was a good story, but I never thought it was one of Clark's best. But
Mhm.
now I've reread it, and I'm reconsidering it. I really think it is one of his very top stories
Mhm.
because of what I'm seeing
Yeah, and I kind of did that when we read Wizard of Earthsea.
there. hmm
There were other parts of the whole series that I kind of clumped into the same story originally in my brain,
hmm
and I realized no, that doesn't happen until the second book, or that doesn't
Yeah.
happen until the third book. So
And
it kind
that
of
book,
refreshes me.
they call it a young adult book, but I'm glad I read it
Yeah, it's
at
pretty
my age
ageless. Yeah.
because there is just so much to that. It
Mm-hmm. For what a short book it is, there's a
Yeah,
lot
I
going
mean,
on.
I've read other young adult books when I was a young adult, like Robert Heinlein's young
Hmm.
adult books, and they were good, but they were a lot simpler than Wizard of Earthsea. You know,
Yeah.
Wizard of Earthsea was far more literal than what I have read in other young adult science fiction and fantasy works,
Hmm. Yeah.
and far more adult,
Yes.
far more sophisticated, dealing with issues that I don't think a 14-year-old is ready to face.
Yeah. But honestly, I think some of my favorite books that I have reread were young adult books
Hmm.
because they are so complex
Hmm.
and they do bring up so many issues. Like I don't know if other kids had to read this book when they were in school, but I read On My Honor like a bunch of times, and it was one of those books that dealt with the concept of death.
Okay.
And so middle schoolers, they kind of have you read this book towards like sixth, seventh grade.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just about these two friends who aren't supposed to go playing by this really fast moving river creek thing. And one of the friends ends up getting in there and drowning.
Hmm.
And so the whole thing is just this kid trying to deal with the coping with having this situation and the emotions of it and all this stuff. And that it's very real. Kids are still really experiencing these kinds of things in life. And so we are teaching them at a younger and younger age complex situations and complex stories.
Hmm.
Um, but also I think because of attention spans, you really need to grip a young adult nowadays because attention spans are getting somewhat shorter. We are dealing with a higher rate of ADHD and ADD in our culture than we have. A lot of that is technology related, but it also makes those stories extremely gripping, extremely fast paced, and very compelling in a lot of regards. So, most of what I've reread is actually young adults at this point.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of, adult fiction that I'm reading for the first time that I definitely would love to read again because, like,
Yeah,
we just finished Naked Lunch. I'm gonna have to reread that book
I'm reading
someday.
it.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's stuff I missed the first time around. There's so much symbolism. There's so much to interpret. There's so much poetically and visually going on
Yeah.
that it's really important. Even Stephen King, his work is dense.
Hmm.
He has very dense but very good work.
Yeah.
It is high literature. I will have to reread it
Hmm.
because I'm sure there's stuff I missed the first time round.
So, what are any downsides of rereading?
I think different stages of life, sometimes you find that it wasn't as good as you remember it. And maybe that's just for the time. Maybe you just needed it from that point. Like, I loved the Phantom Toad booth as a kid. Reading it as an adult, I kind of wondered why the hell was this fun? Like, so there is a downside to it. Some things aren't worth rereading because it
Yeah.
was just for that time.
I
Like,
kind of went through that with Asimov's Nightfall.
mhm.
And when I was young, I read it again probably 4 or 5 times and loved it.
Yeah.
And back then, it had been voted the best science fiction story ever
Mhm.
by the Science Fiction Writers of America Association.
Mhm.
Um, when we reread it for Telltale, it was still good. It made some good points, but there were so many missed opportunities that I
Mhm.
saw
Yeah.
that even in 1940s, someone like Weinbaum would have done it,
Mhm.
where Asimov didn't. He
Yeah.
just completely skipped away from it.
Mhm.
And I feel it could have been a much, much, much better story than it is
Yeah.
if it would take into account a lot of what we take for granted in science fiction today, like world building
Mhm.
and thinking deeper about how situations would affect how civilization develops. You know, just lots of missed opportunities like that for Asimov. There, he
Yeah.
made his point, but there's so much more he could have done with that situation. It made it so much stronger of a story
Mhm.
than what it is.
Yeah. And I think too, another con that I can think of in literature is that just taste changes over
Mhm.
time.
Hmm.
Like I loved historical fiction as a kid and those diary style written books and stuff like that. I was obsessed with those.
Yeah.
Um, I had all kinds of diary based books. I had the American Girl Doll books. As many of those as I could have, I had them because it was historical fiction. It was so interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and Little House on the Prairie. I read the whole series with my mom. I even had like craft books on how to do some of the crafts that were in those particular
Did you
books.
watch the TV series?
I did watch the TV series. Whenever there was a rerun, I did watch it. But I loved the books, and it was now I have no interest in that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the historical fiction I like might be more World War II style, or like, and it's not even particularly about the war or the history, it's about the characters. It would have never occurred to me in high school and college to read horror. Now I'm really enjoying the horror books we've read.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that's an aspect of literature that never would have occurred to me. And I might reread some of those things because I'm sure there's stuff I've missed, like I said about the Stephen King things.
Mm.
So that is kind of the con of rereading is your tastes sometimes have changed so drastically that it's just not up your alley anymore.
Yeah.
Um, or another con I can think of too is like you come in with pre-assumed things.
Mhm.
Like you remember the story well enough. The way you get into it, you're not really reading it.
Yeah.
You're just kind of skimming it for idle time. And in my case, that feels like a waste of time because you could be investing in a book you actually really love or trying something new,
Hmm.
versus going back to something comfortable.
And there's some stories that the whole story is really made great by the surprise ending.
Mhm.
I've never reread
Twist.
Agatha Christie, but rereading something like "And Then There Were None," I know who did it,
Yeah.
and so is it going to be as
And
good?
me reading it for the first time, I'm too good at guessing, so I probably already knew who did it.
Yeah, but a
Yeah.
lot of science fiction fantasy stories are that way with that twist, Twilight Zone type
Hmm.
end.
Yeah, when I read Sharp Objects, it's kind of a mystery, but I knew exactly who did it the first time.
Hmm.
Like by third chapter, I'm like, I met the character. I'm like, it was fucking you. Absolutely, you're the terror. I knew who it was,
Hmm.
but yeah, rereading, yeah, this
So
sometimes the twist is.
yeah, when a work relies upon a surprise for the ending, rereading it, you know what's coming.
Hmm.
And then you got a buddy read so that you can watch a friend discover
Go
it for the
through that.
first time
Yes,
because you know what's going to happen.
live vicariously through the buddy read.
Exactly.
Mhm. I also think it's kind of a con to reread after you've seen the movie version. Because sometimes the movie sticks with you better. And that can be a double-edged sword. Either you're like, oh yeah, they didn't do it that way in the movie, they did it this way. Or, oh yeah, they didn't do it like that, they did it this way. So that can be a pro and a con.
Yeah, I've gotten where I don't even want to watch the movies anymore
We always had the
because I don't want to watch it before I read it. I don't want to watch it after I read it because I always find the book better.
yes, and I actually, as kids, we always had that as a family rule. We would never go see a movie as a family until all of us read the book version first. We did that for all the Harry Potter movies.
Hmm.
We did it for a lot of the Star Wars series. Because there's like extended universe stuff that my brothers were and I were really into. So we had
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff to kind of give us context for a lot of the history and other things. And I don't know if Disney took over.
When I was a kid, I read the novelization of Empire Strikes Back came out before the movie hit the theaters. So I bought it and I read it.
Yeah.
And so I was telling all my friends, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. And they were going, no, that can't be.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I read it.
Yeah. So I kind of just keep that as a general rule. If I know there's a book about it,
Mhm.
I will read the book first.
Yeah.
Before I see the movie. Sometimes I don't find out until I watch the movie. It says based on the book, but I'm like, ah, dang it,
Though I
I
think
done it.
I think in most cases, if you watch the movie first, you're going to enjoy the movie and then read the book, and then you're going to go, oh, the movie really isn't that good.
Yeah, you'll at least enjoy both.
So you'll at least get to enjoy the movie
Yes.
initially,
Yes.
as opposed to reading the book first and then you watch the movie and you go,
Yeah.
what the hell were these people reading?
Mhm.
Like Naked Lunch.
Yeah. I also think one of the cons that I experience with rereading a book is I could have invested that time in a new book
True.
and had a new and fresh story. Not that I think, but that could be a good pro too. A pro is there's comfort in going back to books you've read before.
Yeah.
You know what to expect. You know it's an author you love. You know the story well enough that it's not going to be an emotional roller coaster, maybe like it was the first time. But also, sometimes that's a con too.
Hmm.
Sometimes you want to feel something new or experience something new,
Hmm.
but you
Or
don't.
sometimes, what I deal with a lot is there's a lot of older books that I've never read, and I
Mhm.
want to read them.
Yeah.
But then there's all these new books coming out, and you or Samantha is reading them, or people on BookTube are
Hmm.
reading,
Talking about
talking
it,
about
it's
them.
like,
I'm going, I want to read that.
yeah, the
So what?
TBR list just
Yeah,
keeps
it
getting
just gets bigger and
longer.
bigger, and the piles just keep taking
Yes.
over your room.
Which is the con of rereading is that
Yeah,
the to be read list just keeps extending with the new stuff.
but I'm
So,
not talking about rereading.
hmm,
Just stuff that I haven't ever read
yeah,
that I want to read, but it's older.
yeah,
But then they keep coming out with all this great new stuff.
I know, I know. But in my case, the
Back off
rereading,
already. Give me some breathing room.
quit coming out with such great sounding literature, but don't. But also don't.
Spend a year writing crap
Yeah.
so I can get
Somebody
caught
just
up.
writes something absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Well, but then it's going to become like Naked Lunch.
yeah. Or then it's like, or it's like Twilight, 50 Shades of Grey, where that's kind of, we should also do it. That should be another topic video of the books we always see in thrift stores. We should start reading them.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Dan Brown and
Yeah,
Fifty
Dan Brown,
Shades of
50 Shades of Grey,
Twilight.
Twilight, the Harry Potter books. Um, I keep finding the Bartimaeus trilogy, which is really good.
Yeah,
I'll have you read it.
okay,
We'll get there
someday.
someday. But yeah, so there's just, but rereading does stop you from trying the new things.
Yeah. Yeah, you only
So,
got so much time. You got to make choices.
yep, you
You
gotta
can't read it all,
prioritize. Exactly.
and you can't take it with you.
Yep, when you die, it's gone.
Yeah, you can
So,
hand it off.
I mean, you could get your entire collection burned and put it with your ashes and get it all buried with you. Get like a little,
Sacrilege.
you could get a little, you could have a
Burn
little,
these things.
the little pyramid
You
built.
can't burn books.
And you could do a pyramid, and you could have your books inside the pyramid.
I could
Close them
build this
as a
pyramid out of the
crypt.
books, and it would rival Egypt.
Yeah, seriously. If only we had the money of Nicolas Cage, who has his giant pyramid in New Orleans.
Oh boy.
Good for him. Anyway, but yeah, so there are some cons
Hmm.
to rereading books.
Hmm.
There are also, so this is kind of sort of in topic, but not. Because of how I switched between public and homeschooling multiple times in my life, I have read, I've taken American history at least 7 times. And all the textbooks, despite how different they are still all the same history touched on. So there is a con of rereading in that
When
you
you're
can
dealing with facts, yeah.
experience some burnout. But it also kind of happened with English literature too,
Mhm.
where there's a lot of things that I asked my teachers if I could read something else because I had been in a private school, I was homeschooled, then I was in a public school, then I was homeschooled through a different public school, and then I went to public school in a different state when we moved. So the literature just it's all the same literature, but the curriculums are different where sometimes the benchmarks are different age groups across different stuff,
Mhm.
especially when you switch to a new state. So there was some literature I reread too that I had to ask my teachers, can I read something else and do a different report? Because I've read this book so many times. Like I could write you a report or a blurb or anything about this easily, but can I do something else too? Or can I just, can I just take all the tests and cruise through this segment of the class?
But there's also something to be said when you switch to a different school, have a different teacher, get a different viewpoint on stuff.
Hmm.
I
Yes.
remember ninth grade English, Don Bruno, great English teacher. I'm trying to remember what the three books were that we dealt with. One was The Yearling,
Hmm.
one was Romeo and Juliet, and there was a third one that now I'm forgetting what it was. But he had us read them and he taught us. Well, when I moved on to 10th grade, and this seemed to be everybody did this.
Hmm.
Um, After my first day of 10th grade, I went back to visit Don Bruno.
Yeah.
And I get there and there's all these other kids from my class that are there too. He was that good of a teacher.
Yeah.
But when I finally got some time to talk to him, and what I did, he hated science fiction films, but PBS had done Ursula Le Guin's Lathe of Heaven.
Yeah.
So I told him about it and I told him he had to watch it.
Hmm.
Um, so after I did that, he came back to me and was telling me how over the summer, he had been thinking about the three books he taught us, and he started seeing all these connections between them.
Hmm.
And so he had this whole plan of how he was going to teach how these things were all related in this year's, and the only way I knew about this, the only way I got to experience is the fact that I decided to go back
Hmm.
to junior high school and visit Don Bruno.
Yeah, and
And he
figure out that that
took
was.
the time to talk to me about it.
Hmm.
So, even the same teacher the next year could see some new connections
Yeah.
and come up with some new perspectives on the
That's
same
awesome.
old literature that you could um, gain from.
Hmm. And there's connections I made too. Like when we were reading Hamlet in high school, I had read Claudius and Gertrude by John Updike
Hmm.
the previous year,
Hmm.
having never read Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Ah,
And so while I was reading it, I was like, is there a prequel by John Updike called Claudius and Gertrude? Because I'm pretty sure I read that last year. And my teacher's like, Emily, you never cease to freaking amaze me. She's like, yes, that is the prequel that was made many years later. So it was fun to be able to talk to my teacher about that. And I really want to reread it again, and also then read Hamlet right after, like, just to kind of go through that process again and see what
like
else
a
I see
future
in
Telltale
this.
project.
Yes, I love that book. It was really interesting. Another historical fiction
Mhm.
that, maybe now I have a better perspective of it. But back then I was super into that. And it had that kind of like mystery fantasy element because that's just kind of how
Okay.
Shakespeare and medieval England feels.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was really interesting, but I think it's interesting the experiences you have when rereading, and I say the pros probably far outweigh the cons
I think so.
when it comes to rereading
Yeah, it
literature.
depends on the story. Like I say, some like a lot of Frederick Brown's short stories rely upon a twist ending.
Hmm.
First time you read it, it's really cool
Yeah.
because you get hit with this twist ending that you weren't expecting it. But the next time you go back and reread it, it's the same story and it's good,
Yeah.
but you know what's
The
coming.
jump scares are
So
gone. It's like seeing a horror movie a second or third time. All the jump scares are gone, and you know it's coming.
it's like seeing an accident that you've already seen.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Watching
nice.
history repeat itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So or Lady and the Tiger.
Mhm.
If you've read it, you know how that comes out. If you've never read it, that's the value of the story. It's
Mhm.
the ending.
Yes. But yeah. So I don't think I really have anything else I can think of for pros and cons.
Okay,
So
that's it.
that's what we got, guys. So let us know some of the pros and cons that you can think of, because I'm sure there's probably more than we have talked about, but we've been making videos all day, so
Yeah.
my brain's fried. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Like, subscribe, comment. Let us know some of the books you reread and why you love them. That would be awesome. We would love to hear it.
And how many times has anybody read a same book 100 times?
I think that would be fun.
I'd like to
There are
know.
some people who do like annual book reading where they
Yeah.
read the same book every year.
Yeah,
And
I
I'm
sold
like,
my
woo.
paperback of Dracula to somebody that told me they had that Signet, I think it was a Signet, either that or Bantam edition of Dracula, and they read it every October. And they've read it so many times they fell apart. And so they were looking for it because they love that edition. They were
Mhm.
looking for that edition. And I had my edition that I had actually bought new and never read and
Yeah.
put it online for sale. And
And then you got your pretty,
they
was it a
snapped it up.
Sun Tup edition of Dracula or what edition was that?
Amaranthi.
Yes,
The
that was
one with
really
the
lovely.
velvet cover.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it went to a good home.
Hmm.
But yeah, so thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.